Hello everyone, welcome to Datu's Corner. I'm your host, Datu Tim. Today's topic, what was the Can-Am chapter of the International Modern Arnis Federation, the IMAF? But before we start today's topic, if you haven't already, could you do me a favor? Can you subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit that notification button, and by all means, feel free to share this video wherever you feel appropriate. And with no further ado, it is now time for Datu's Corner. So, today's topic, what was the Can-Am chapter of the International Modern Arnis Federation? Well, before we start with that, let's talk about why I'm talking about it today. Recently, Dan Anderson wrote a book on modern Arnis and modern Arnis history. And unfortunately, there are a few inaccuracies in the book, and several of them dealing with me. Since they're not going to magically change overnight, I'm doing this video series on the issues that I have, the inaccuracies, to clear things up. If you want a review of the book, Dr. Jerome Barber has done a review on FMA Discussion. I think it's also on his Facebook page. And to sum it up, it basically says it should have been professionally edited. There's a bunch of inaccuracies, so on and so forth. I've heard several people, about at least 3 other people who have had complaints with the book, thinking that it would have been nice if Dan would have at least just reached out and talked to us before writing the book to make sure he had the information correct, which he didn't. So let's get into the Can-Am chapter of the IMAF. Now, what Dan said in the book was that several of us had left to do their own thing. You have people like Kelly Warden, Bram Frank, Hock Hockheim, who went off and did their own expression of martial arts. And to one level or another, they all kept some form of ties of communication with Professor. I was put in that category that I had left to go into Canada, and even though I was doing things in Canada, I never left. I went with Professor's blessing. As a matter of fact, I was doing work for Professor. So really quickly in '85, I started my modern Arnis journey. It was the first martial art I had ever started training formally. Did some backyard stuff, but nothing formal. '87, I was a brown belt with John Bryan in the Filipino Karate Academy, and we had a separating the ways. There's a few things going on I had issues with. He was also getting out of the art. He was selling his school. So Professor found out that I had left. He had reached out to me directly, which initially I wasn't thinking, how to get my phone number. Of course, it was from John. And he talked to me. He goes, "Do you want to still train?" I go, "Yeah, but who's going to teach me?" He goes, "If you want to train, you will be my personal student." Well, I'm a 22-year-old brown belt and the grandmaster of the system, who's in Black Belt Hall of Fame, asks me if I want to continue and be his personal student. Well, of course I said yes. And that decision affected the rest of my life. And looking back, I wouldn't have changed a thing. Now, as I progressed in my training to become black belt and beyond, I had a bunch of people that would come with me, and we would go throughout the United States and Canada to train with Professor. So for those who aren't familiar with the geography here, I live in a suburb of Buffalo. Buffalo is a border city of Canada, Ontario. Ontario is the largest province, or at least the most populated. At the time, 90% of the population of Canada lived in Ontario, and 90% of them lived in within 100 miles of the border. So I could be in Canada in 15 minutes, Niagara Falls in 30, up to Toronto in 2 hours, and London, Ontario about 2.25 to 2.5 hours. And Professor would go to some of these places, and we had training groups in these areas. So, while I was doing this, I always brought a group of people with me. For the most part, I never traveled alone. And people got to see that it wasn't just my ability, but my students had this ability. Now, this was a no-brainer. We had a full-time committed modern Arnis program. This was not the art within your art like everyone else was doing it. Buffalo had over 11 modern Arnis schools in a small metropolitan area. So we had the high concentration of schools, as well as a high caliber of instructors in the area as well. We were really movers and shakers when it came to modern Arnis. There was 3 hotbeds: Philly, Buffalo, and Detroit were like the 3 primary centers of the art. when it came to high caliber people and high concentration of students. Now, during these travels, like I said, people saw that not only I, but my group was doing well, and I was producing quality and a quantity of black belts. At the end of my tenure with Professor, I ended up, before he passed away, producing 20 black belts from black to first to second, all the way to third degree black belt. So when people would see us on the set, they were very talented martial artists, but Arnis was a secondary or tertiary art. It wasn't their specialty. So these people would start reaching out to me and my group to hang out for us to train them up. They wanted to level up their skill set. We respected the fact that many of these people were more knowledgeable in martial arts than I was. But when it came to the art of modern Arnis, the craft of modern Arnis, these people were behind what we were doing, not ahead of what we were doing. So, since I was so close to Canada, a lot of the Canadians kept coming down, because when Professor was in Canada, most of the time he was doing more of the big threes. Now, the big three was Remy, Presas, Wally J, and George Dillman. You'd have 100, 150, 200 people show up to these events, but Professor would only teach, each instructor would only teach about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So you really couldn't dig into any one system. This was a great opportunity to get a sample of these three systems. But if you wanted to dig in, for the most part, you really had to come to the States. You'd go to the Michigan summer camp, or you come to seminars in Detroit or Buffalo. Now, generally, just so you know the economics of things, at the time, the exchange rate was 30 to 50% on the dollar in the Americans' favor. So a host, let's say Professor charged $2,000. Well, that'd be 3,000 Canadian, and dollar for dollar, a US dollar, what it bought in the United States was the same thing a Canadian dollar, would buy in Canada. Can of pop, $1 here, $1 there. So there really wasn't, once you got in the country, the dollars were equal, but that exchange rate was killing people. So it was easier to send people in the States than it was to bring Professor up there. So a bunch of the Canadians around 90, 91, they started coming to Buffalo, coming to my club, and leveling up their skills. Professor started noticing this, because when we would go to the events, I'd only have maybe 5, 10 people from my school with me, but I might have a group of 20 or 30 people hang out. We'd set up at a seminar, and all the schools that would network together all hung out together. And a lot of them were wearing my school colors, or my school t-shirt, their choice, not mine. And Professor realized, with my close proximity and my relationship with the Canadians, that this would be a good fit. So in '94, he made me one of his proteges, and he gave me a mission statement to go into Canada and help develop modern Arnis there. Now, it was to help develop. They already had something going, but it was to level up, because they didn't have a specialist up there. So Canada, like Toronto and London, were home away from homes for me, So we started the Can-Am chapter of the IMAF, which made sense, because, I was already teaching a lot of disarming and the striking patterns and such at the camps. By 94, 95, I became the senior forms instructor for the organization. So becoming the Can-Am director. Now, what's the Can-Am? The Canadian American. So this region, if you're not on the border of Canada, you're not familiar with it. You most likely aren't familiar with the phrase. But there was plenty of Can-Am, Canadian American, sporting groups. Motorsports, hockey, soccer, lacrosse, martial arts, all these different leagues that would go. So this was very big in our region. So that's where the name of the Can-Am chapter of the IMAF comes from, the International Modern Arnis Federation. It was the Canadian American chapter. Okay? It's not a separate entity. It was right there. So I don't know where the misunderstanding came from, because, with the word there, chapter, like the IMAF Philippines, IMAFP, that's a simple one. It's the Philippines chapter of the mother organization, which was here in the United States, because the headquarters for modern Arnis was here in the States. It was where Professor lived. Since about 75 up until he passed away, this is where it was based. Now, so the question was, how did we get this wrong? Why is this information incorrect? Well, Dan wasn't around. Dan admittedly said that, he had a baby. He went off the set. He even said publicly at one time that he had retired around 97. For whatever reason, he wasn't around. For 2 decades, Dan has been saying that Professor told me to get involved, and until it was pointed out recently, which meant he wasn't involved, he's recanted that and said, well, now Professor told me to get involved, but I've always been involved. No, he wasn't. He may have been actively training the art in his school. No one's questioning that. But he wasn't involved. Geographically challenged, he's on the North Pacific, the Northwest. Professor did most of his business here on the East Coast and the Midwest. Not many events were happening in Oregon. Actually, they were all gone by then. It was like, I think the last event would have been 96, 97. So he wasn't involved in the community. Another reason why this is, so he wasn't wrong. It wasn't around to see what was going on. But the other thing is, he didn't reach out to vet his information, and that's where the problem was. He wrote a book based on his opinion on things. Now, that's what I want to tell people. The book is his view on things, which isn't necessarily accurate. Martial art books generally aren't. They're someone's opinion on things. It's not a textbook. It's not a medical journal. It is an opinion on things. I don't know why he wrote the book, because we had a good one that he's actually in. So this is the book that I would recommend. You can find it on Amazon. I do not get a kickback from this. I will put a link once I find it where you can get this. So this is Modern Arnis, History and Practice by Mag Ariel, if I'm pronouncing it right. There's a whole bunch of people in here, including Dan Anderson, myself, Jerome Barber, and so on and so forth. The Presas brothers, like I said, there's Bruce Chu, Chad Doolin, Andy Filardo. This book is probably more inclusive than Dan's book when it comes to people. And the nice thing, what did they do in this book? Well, Mob didn't have direct access to everybody, but he had other people that did, and they would reach out. Like, Chad Doolin interviewed me for the book, and I think he interviewed Kelly Warden as well for the book. So they went out, they reached out to people, checked the facts, and did something. It wasn't just something, my opinion, and went off from there. So as I say this was Dan's opinion, here's what I'm saying. I'm giving you my take on things as well. So here's what I tell everyone. Do your own research. Listen to what I say, check my facts. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If I'm right, I'm right. Like I said, I'm going to be doing a series of videos on the inaccuracies, from my point of view, of of Dan's book when it comes to me and my relationship with Professor. Okay. Can-Am chapter was Remy's mission statement for me. That was not me leaving. I resigned in 2001 after Professor, it was announced that he resigned due to his medical condition before he passed away. That was in 2001. But anyone who was actively involved would have seen me at most of the camps and seminars, not just attending, but teaching. Toronto, I opened up the first hour of the seminar there with him. And I would do this at other places as well. So, hope everyone takes this the way it was meant. Feel free to contact me directly if you have any other questions. As always, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Doctor's Corner. Everybody, please stay safe and stay sane.